The chamber was still, the kind of stillness that hums before history happens. Cameras hovered, pens poised, every breath synchronized in suspense. Then, from the heart of the Senate floor, a voice cut through the murmurs like lightning through glass. BrianSchatz.com. Composed, the senator, who rarely raised his tone, leaned toward the mic and said, "When justice stands tall, the room listens." The words weren't scripted. They weren't rehearsed. They were instinct, truth bursting through protocol. Across the aisle, heads turned. Even his political rivals froze mid-note. For a heartbeat, it didn't feel like politics. It felt like something purer, a collective recognition that dignity had just spoken, and then it came. The sound that's nearly extinct in Washington. Applause. Genuine, uncoordinated applause. It rolled through the chamber, gathering power, echoing off marble and memory alike. Schatz didn't smile. He didn't need to. The message wasn't about him, it was about what and who. He was honoring, because standing just a few feet away was the reason the air itself felt different. Representative Jasmine Crockett. Her resolve unshaken, her presence undeniable. But the applause wasn't just for her words. It was for everything she's fought to represent. Rewind the clock. Before the applause, before the moment that silenced Washington, there was the grind, months of hearings, clashes, and headlines that tested Jasmine. Crockett's patience and resolve. She wasn't just another freshman voice in Congress. She was the lightning rod, the one who spoke with precision when others shouted for cameras, who turned anger into argument and bias into evidence. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was armor forged in fire. Each session brought new trials, interruptions, condescension, double standards, dressed as decorum. She endured them all with the poise of someone who understood the stakes weren't personal. They were generational. Every time she held her ground, she wasn't just defending herself. She was defending the idea that dignity and defiance could coexist. And Brian Schatz noticed. He watched how, amid chaos, she never slipped into theatrics. How she made empathy sound like strategy and truth feel like resistance. His recognition wasn't political courtesy, it was acknowledgement long overdue. Because in a city addicted to performance, Jasmine Crockett had become something rarer, authentic. And when authenticity meets adversity in public view, it becomes a movement. But to understand why his words mattered, you have to see what she's endured, and how she turned chaos into conviction. In the theater of Washington, the opposition rarely arrives as a single villain. It comes cloaked in civility, layered beneath protocol, wrapped in the smug certainty of those who've never been interrupted mid-sentence until they do the interrupting themselves. Jasmine Crockett stepped into that storm, eyes wide open. But even she couldn't have predicted how loud the dismissal would become. Committee hearings turned into battlegrounds. Questions weren't asked to seek truth. They were crafted to provoke her. When she challenged misinformation, the reaction was predictable. Headlines dissected her tone instead of her arguments. Critics called her too sharp, too emotional, or too bold. The irony. Her calm often unsettled them more than confrontation ever could. The real antagonist wasn't a person. It was a culture, one that treats passion from a woman of color as a threat, and authority from the same as arrogance. It was the smirk across the table, the performative sighs from colleagues pretending not to listen. It was power playing dress up as professionalism, but Jasmine didn't flinch. Her strategy wasn't volume, it was precision. Every pause, every measured glance, every fact she dropped carried the weight of restraint sharpened into power. Her composure became contagious. What began as quiet respect in the chamber spilled onto the internet, clips of her dismantling. Falsehoods without breaking eye contact spread like wildfire. #Crockett.com trended for days, not as fandom, but as validation. Viewers saw in her what Washington often forgets. Strength doesn't always need to shout. Behind every interruption, she built credibility. Behind every condescending comment, she built momentum. And as the noise grew, so did her audience. People who were tired of watching politics reward the loudest voice in the room instead of the most grounded one. But every storm tests more than resolve. It reveals character. And Jasmine's response would make Washington stop and listen before the lights of Washington ever found her. Jasmine Crockett was already standing in the glare of harder truths. In cramped courtrooms with flickering bulbs and worn-out benches, she fought for people who didn't have microphones or headlines, just hope that someone, somewhere, would believe them. She wasn't chasing ambition. She was chasing justice. Her clients weren't powerful. They were exhausted, forgotten, written off by systems designed to fail them. That's where she learned composure. Not as a political strategy, but as survival. Every raised voice in court taught her that calm was strength. Every lost case reminded her that even defeat could plant the seeds of reform. When she walked into Congress years later, she carried that same unshakable steadiness. It wasn't the product of media training or staff rehearsals. It was the muscle memory of a woman who'd stood between injustice and those crushed beneath it. Colleagues saw a freshman lawmaker. Brian Schatz saw something deeper, a purpose anchored in lived experience. He'd watched her navigate hearings where patience was tested, where every win felt like a whisper against a wall of noise. What he admired most wasn't her rhetoric, it was her restraint. In a city addicted to theatrics, she refused to audition. Her arguments didn't trend because they were loud. They resonated because they were real. That authenticity became her signature, the quiet defiance of a woman who didn't need to play the game to change it. So when Brian Schatz stood that day, his words weren't crafted for applause. They were an acknowledgement, a moment of rare sincerity cutting through the static of politics. His voice carried what so many felt but few had said aloud, that integrity still has a place in public service. And then the tension that had defined her journey flipped, because recognition came from the most unexpected place. The chamber had been simmering for days, voices clashing, tempers flaring and reason drowning beneath the sound of ego. It was one of those weeks in Washington where debate blurred into theater, where every word seemed aimed at the cameras instead of the country. Then Jasmine Crockett rose. No papers slammed, no grand gestures, just a stillness that demanded attention. The kind of silence that rearranges a room before a single word is spoken. Her tone was measured, deliberate, and dangerously calm. She didn't interrupt. She dismantled. Each sentence sliced through layers of noise, not with aggression, but with clarity. When others fumbled for applause lines, she chose precision. Her logic landed with the quiet force of truth, undeniable, inarguable, and deeply unsettling for those who thrived on spectacle. Across the aisle, faces shifted. Some rolled eyes. Others leaned forward, realizing this wasn't a performance. This was a reckoning. Even her critics couldn't look away. Crockett's calm wasn't passive, it was power under control. A lesson in what leadership looks like when stripped of theatrics. From his seat a few rows back, Brian Schatz watched, motionless, attentive. A man witnessing a transformation in real time. The noise had stopped. The grandstanding had faded. What came next wasn't a debate. It was a moment of truth that brought the entire chamber to its feet. The room was still trembling with tension when Brian Schatz rose from his seat. No one expected it. No one was prepared for it. The murmurs faded, replaced by the low hum of curiosity, the kind that fills the air before something real happens. He didn't carry notes. No aides whispered behind him. It wasn't planned. He simply straightened his jacket, stepped toward the mic, and spoke. "Mr. Speaker," he began, his tone calm, but cutting through the static like a steady drumbeat. "I've sat in this chamber long enough to recognize the difference between performance and purpose. Today, we've witnessed the latter. Every eye turned toward him. Some expected another political soundbite. What they got instead was reverence, unfiltered and rare. Schatz's words poured out, deliberate and unscripted. He spoke of Jasmine Crockett, not as a headline, not as a hashtag, but as a human being who had walked through storms most couldn't imagine. She has stood in rooms where her voice was dismissed, yet she never raised it to demand respect, he said. She earned it. Through reason, through restraint, through the kind of courage that doesn't trend but endures. The room shifted. Even the usual cynics looked up. Cameras zoomed in, capturing a chamber that for the first time in a long time looked united not by party, but by decency. He continued, his words building like a symphony finding its final note. In an age of shouting, Schatz said, his voice steady, you remind us that calm is not weakness, it's wisdom. And that justice, when spoken with dignity, doesn't need to roar to be heard. A hush followed. Then a sound no one could have predicted. Applause, genuine, rolling. Sustained applause that filled the chamber like oxygen. Staffers stood. Members rose slowly, some clapping with hesitation, others with unguarded admiration. Even a few from the opposite aisle joined in because in that instant, the room wasn't divided by ideology. It was united by truth. Crockett didn't smile or wave. She simply nodded, the same steady composure she'd held throughout every challenge. For her, validation wasn't the applause. It was being seen for what she had always been, consistent, calm, and unyieldingly just. Schatz took his seat again, the echo of his words lingering like a moral chord that refused to fade. Around the room, faces softened. Conversations hushed. Cameras kept rolling, but for once they weren't chasing chaos. They were documenting clarity, because what had just happened wasn't politics. It was restoration of dignity, of respect, of something Washington had almost forgotten it could still feel. And as the applause thundered one last time, somewhere deep within that chamber, a shift occurred, subtle but seismic. A reminder that leadership isn't about volume. It's about values, but applause is only the beginning. What happened after that speech spread far beyond the chamber walls. The moment didn't just echo through the chamber, it detonated across the internet. Within hours, clips of Brian Schatz's impromptu tribute to Jasmine Crockett flooded every feed. News outlets replayed it in slow motion, analyzing every pause, every glance, every syllable of sincerity. The New York Times called it the rarest sound in Washington, authentic applause. Cable networks looped the footage like a national reset button. Commentators on opposite sides of the aisle for once agreed, it wasn't about politics. It was about principle. On TikTok, the clip became a montage of reactions. Young creators splicing. Crockett's silent nod with captions like "Power doesn't shout, it stands tall." Twitter, or what remained of it, lit up with hashtags that spread like wildfire. Hashtag justice deserves applause. Hashtag Crockett moment. Hashtag ComizPower. Even late-night hosts, usually eager for satire, treated the exchange with reverence. One remarked, in a town built on sound bites, someone finally delivered a sentence that meant something. Oh. The impact wasn't confined to screens. Staffers across D.C. whispered about it over coffee. Journalists rewrote their leads. Even political opponents, the same ones who once rolled their eyes at Crockett's composure, privately admitted, she earned that moment. And Jasmine? She didn't bask in it. No victory lap. No fiery follow-up post. Just a brief message on her social feed, grateful for those who listen when voices tremble, but truth stands firm. Justice isn't loud, it's lasting. It was classic Crockett humility in motion, conviction without theatrics. The kind of authenticity that can't be spun, bought, or rehearsed. Her response only deepened the public's respect. In an era addicted to outrage, she chose grace. The contrast was magnetic. By nightfall, the clip had crossed 10 million views. News anchors replayed the standing ovation as a symbol of something bigger. The possibility that integrity could still move a room, that empathy could still win applause. For once, America wasn't sharing chaos. It was sharing composure. But behind the viral moment was a deeper message, one that reminded America what justice really looks like. In the end, it wasn't about politics. It wasn't even about the speech. It was about something Washington too often forgets: principle. Brian Schatz's applause wasn't partisan. It was human. It was one person recognizing another for what truly matters in leadership: effort, empathy, and endurance. For a brief shining moment, the chamber stopped being a battlefield and became a mirror, reflecting what justice looks like when stripped of ego. Jasmine Crockett's journey from the courtroom to Congress. wasn't fueled by ambition but by a relentless belief that dignity can exist even in chaos. Her calm under fire didn't just silence the noise, it redefined strength. In a world addicted to outrage, she showed that restraint can be revolutionary. That's why the applause mattered. It wasn't just a reaction, it was recognition. A signal that America, weary from division, still honors those who stand for fairness. The sound of hands meeting hands carried a message louder than any partisan's slogan. Integrity still resonates. For a fleeting moment, politics gave way to principle. The noise subsided. The performance paused. And through that stillness, a truth emerged that real power doesn't come from domination, but from decency. As the applause faded and cameras clicked off, the echo remained soft but certain. Not the sound of victory, the sound of virtue. And in that quiet aftermath, one message lingered above the noise. A whisper powerful enough to carry through the halls of power? And beyond, integrity still echoes. The camera lingers on the chamber, the final echoes of applause still hanging in the air like a promise. The lights dim, but the energy remains. Then, a calm voice cuts through the silence, in an age where shouting drowns out substance. It only takes one moment of sincerity to remind us what leadership truly sounds like. The image of Brian Schatz and Jasmine Crockett fades into a montage, faces watching. People inspired, headlines rewriting themselves. This wasn't just a speech. It was a shift proof that grace can still command a room. That conviction still carries weight, because this story isn't about parties or politics. It's about people and the courage to stand for something real when the world rewards noise. Then, the narrator's voice grows warmer, inviting. Almost personal. If you believe integrity deserves the spotlight, share this moment. Let it echo. Because every view, every comment, every voice that rises for decency tells the world dignity still matters. The screen fades to black, the applause now a heartbeat in the distance. A final line appears in bold white. Integrity still echoes.